Chapter 1. The air in the back room of the Krasnaya Dama casino tasted of rust, stale vodka, and the unique, sour desperation of a man who had just bet his soul and lost. Katya Petrenko stood by the door, her turpentine-stained fingernails digging into her palms. She hadn't wanted to come. Her father, Victor, had insisted, grabbing her from the cramped studio apartment she shared with 2 other art students. He'd been frantic, his eyes slick with a familiar manic terror. "It's a misunderstanding, Katya," he'd slurred, dragging her by the arm. "I just need you to be charming. He's a patron of the arts. You'll like him." Now, watching her father tremble before the man in the high-backed leather chair, she knew patron of the arts was the most grotesque lie he had ever told. The room was shadowed, dominated by a heavy mahogany desk. 2 men, built like brick monoliths in ill-fitting suits, flanked the doorway behind her. They hadn't touched her, but their presence was a physical weight, pressing the air from her lungs. The man at the desk had not spoken. Not once. This, she knew, was the source of her father's terror. This was the man who owned the Krasnaya Dama, the man who owned the district, the man who, according to whispers in the kitchens where Katya sometimes waitressed, owned the politicians and the police. This was Mikhail the silent Volkov, the new Pakhan of the Volkov Bratva. He'd taken the city's underworld 6 months ago in a coup so bloody it was spoken of only in hushed, fragmented sentences. He was a ghost, a rumor, a force of nature, and he was sitting, unmoving, in front of her. "Please, Pakhan," Victor whispered, his voice cracking. He was weeping. Not silent, dignified tears, but the messy, bubbling sobs of a broken child. "It's the debt. I know. It's massive. I miscalculated. The streak, it was 5 million, a voice cut through the air. It wasn't Mikhail. It was his Sovetnik, a lean man with a pitted face, standing near the desk. He was reading from a ledger. 5,340,000, plus interest, as of this morning. "I can get it," Victor cried, dropping to his knees. The sound of his corduroy trousers hitting the plush carpet was a dull, pathetic thwump. "I just need time. A month, 2 weeks. Katya closed her eyes. She thought of the canvas waiting for her back home. A commission, a small one, a portrait of a rich woman's poodle that would barely cover her share of the rent. But it was hers. It was work. It was paint and linen and the smell of linseed oil, the only things that made sense. This world, this room of dark wood and darker men, was an abstraction, a nightmare. Mikhail Volkov finally moved. He didn't stand. He simply leaned forward, bringing his face into the weak amber light of the desk lamp. He was younger than Katya had expected. Perhaps 30. But it was a brutal 30. His face was a collection of harsh planes and sharp angles, a scar cutting a white line from his left temple to the corner of his jaw. His hair was black, short. But it was his eyes that held her. They were a flat, pale gray, as depthless and cold as a frozen lake. He looked at Victor. Then slowly his gaze lifted and found Katya. It was not a leer. It was not hunger. It was assessment. It was the look a collector gives a piece of porcelain, a jeweler checking a diamond for flaws. He saw her, every part of her, from her worn-out boots to the defiant tilt of her chin, and filed her away. He lifted one hand, 2 fingers, a silent gesture. The Sovetnik nodded. "The debt is complicated, Victor. I'll pay. I swear on my mother's grave." "The Pakhan does not care for time," the Sovetnik said, his voice bored. "He does not deal in promises. He is a man who balances ledgers, and your ledger is catastrophic." "What do you want?" Victor choked out. "My life?" Take it, just not her. Don't hurt her." Katya's stomach hollowed out. "Oh, Papa, you already have." Mikhail Volkov looked at his sovetnik. He made another gesture. A simple brush of his hand, as if wiping a slate clean. The sovetnik smiled, a thin reptilian expression. The Pakhan is, as you noted, a patron of the arts. He is willing, in a show of profound generosity, to consider the debt settled. Victor's head snapped up, a pathetic, dangerous hope lighting his ruined face. "Settled? Pakhan? Thank you. Spasibo, I will never forget." "In exchange," the sovetnik continued, silencing him, "for her." He pointed, not at Katya, but at the file on the desk, which Katya now saw, with a lurch of profound sickness, contained her university transcripts, her student ID photo, a copy of her driver's license. Victor froze. He stared at the sovetnik, then at the silent Pakhan. The hope curdled. For her? What? What do you mean?" "The Pakhan is in need of a wife," the sovetnik stated, as if discussing the weather. "You will provide one. The debt is erased. Your life is yours. Her life is his." The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier than the monoliths at the door. Katya felt the blood drain from her face, her hands going numb. Wife. Not a hostage, not a concubine. A wife, a binding, a chain. "No," Victor whispered. Mikhail Volkov raised an eyebrow. "No, please, anything else. She's my daughter. She's an artist. She's good. She's a good girl." "She is collateral," the sovetnik said, "and you have defaulted." "No!" Victor screamed, lunging, not at the Pakhan, but at Katya. He grabbed her arm. "Run, Katya! Run!" It was useless. Before she could even process the command, one of the monoliths at the door moved. There was a sound, a wet, heavy crack, as a fist connected with Victor's temple. He collapsed, boneless, onto the carpet. Katya didn't scream. She was too terrified to make a sound. She simply stared at her father's unmoving form, a thin line of blood trickling from his nose. "He will be taken home," the sovetnik said, adjusting his cuffs. "He will awaken with a headache and no debt. A fortunate man." Mikhail Volkov stood up. The true terrifying scale of him was suddenly apparent. He was tall, over 6'4", and his bespoke suit did nothing to hide the brutal breadth of his shoulders. He moved with a heavy, deliberate grace, the silence of his movements more threatening than any shout. He walked past his sovetnik. He walked past her sobbing, unconscious father. He stopped directly in front of Katya. She had to crane her neck to look up at him. She met his cold, gray eyes, and her terror was so profound it became a strange, icy calm. She would not cry. She would not beg. Her father had done enough of that for a lifetime. He stared down at her for a long, suffocating moment. He smelled of expensive soap and cold steel. He lifted his hand, and she flinched, bracing for the strike. His fingers, large and calloused, brushed her jawline. It was not a caress. It was an inspection. His thumb grazed the small smudge of ultramarine blue paint on her cheekbone. He looked at the pigment on his thumb, then back at her. He turned and walked to the door. He paused, looked back at her, and spoke. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble, shocking after the profound silence. It was the sound of rocks grinding together. It held no anger, no passion, no emotion at all. It was a simple statement of fact. Bring her. The journey to the penthouse was a blur of rain and muted lights. She was placed in the back of a black Maybach, sandwiched between the two monoliths. Mikhail Volkov sat in the front passenger seat, a silent silhouette against the rain-streaked cityscape. Katya was a resilient thing. She had survived her mother's death, her father's spiraling addiction, and the cutthroat politics of art school. She was a painter. Painters were observers. They were survivors. They took the world's ugliness and brutality and transformed it. They found the light in the shadow. But as the elevator ascended, a silent, high-speed cage of glass and steel, she felt that resilience cracking. The doors opened directly into the penthouse. It wasn't a home. It was a mausoleum. It was vast, a 2-story cavern of concrete, glass, and black steel. The walls were almost entirely glass, offering a 360-degree view of the glittering, rain-swept city below. It was brutalist and cold, yet it was filled with art. Not old masters. It was all modern, stark, challenging, expensive pieces. A Rothko that glowed with a furious, trapped red. A massive, twisted Giacometti sculpture that looked like a screaming shadow. A Pollock that was all chaos and rage. It was the most beautiful, terrifying gallery she had ever seen. It was Mikhail Volkov's private collection. One of the guards nudged her forward. Mikhail was standing by the far wall, shrugging off his suit jacket. He handed it to a servant who seemed to materialize from the shadows. Katya stood, dripping on the polished concrete floor, a sacrifice on a modern altar. Mikhail turned to her. He walked across the enormous room, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He stopped a few feet away. "Your father said you are an artist," he said. His voice was just as quiet, just as gravelly as it had been in the casino. She swallowed, her throat dry. "I am a painter." "Good." He gestured to a spiral staircase made of black iron. "Upstairs. Your room is to the left. Your things have been provided." "My things?" "Art supplies. Whatever you required. My people were thorough." She stared at him, confused. This was not the bridal suite. This was not a cage of silk and gold. What do you want from me?" she whispered, the question torn from her. Mikhail Volkov looked at her, his pale eyes unreadable. He seemed to look through her, at the storm lashing the windows behind her. "I have settled your father's debt," he stated. "You are now mine. Your life here has one purpose, one rule." He pointed to a set of heavy wooden doors at the far end of the second-floor mezzanine. "That is your studio. You will be provided with food, with clothing, with anything you need for your work. You will not leave this penthouse. You will not speak to anyone but me or my staff." He took a step closer, the full weight of his power and his darkness pressing in on her. She was his. A piece in his collection. A bird in a brutalist cage. "You are here," Mikhail Volkov said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that chilled her to the bone. "To paint." Chapter 2. Katya woke to the sound of silence. It was not the familiar, comforting quiet of her own cramped apartment, where the silence was always layered with the rumble of the heater, the drip of a leaky faucet, the distant wail of sirens. This was an absolute, pressurized void, the silence of a tomb. She was on a bed large enough to sleep 6, in a room of gray, textured concrete and dark, unpolished wood. Her room. A room, she noted with a chill, that had no lock on the inside of the door. For a long, disoriented moment, the events of the previous night felt like a particularly vicious nightmare. The casino, her father's collapse, the cold, assessing eyes of Mikhail Volkov. Then she saw the clothes laid out for her on a minimalist black bench. Simple black leggings, a gray cashmere sweater, and soft leather slippers. They were her size. The clinical, impersonal provision of them was more terrifying than any threat. "You are here to paint." The command echoed in the silent room. It was a lifeline and a death sentence. She dressed, her fingers clumsy. The cashmere was sinfully soft, a stark contrast to the rough, paint-stained wool she was used to. She felt like a stray dog being forcibly groomed for a show. She splashed cold water on her face in the attached bathroom, a cavern of black marble and steel, and tried to force her mind to focus. Fear was a luxury. Panic was a waste of energy. Her father was presumably alive. She was presumably safe from immediate physical violence. The price for this safety was her life, her freedom, and her work. She exited her room onto the mezzanine. The penthouse was brighter now, though the sky outside was a uniform, weeping gray. The rain had not stopped, lashing against the 2-story glass walls that made her feel perpetually exposed. A specimen in a billionaire's terrarium. The apartment was empty. No guards, no servants, no sign of the Pakhan. Only his art. The Giacometti sculpture cast a long, tormented shadow in the morning light. The Rothko seemed to throb with a dull inner heat. She was a prisoner in a museum. Her eyes found the heavy wooden doors at the end of the hall. Your studio. She walked toward them, her slippered feet making no sound on the polished concrete. She expected the doors to be locked. She braced herself to be trapped, to find that this, too, was a lie. Her hand touched the cold iron handle. She pushed. The door swung open on silent, well-oiled hinges. Katya's breath caught in her throat. The room was magnificent. It was twice the size of her entire apartment. One wall was a floor-to-ceiling window, angled like a skylight, capturing the flat, diffused gray light perfectly. It was an artist's dream light. And the supplies. He hadn't just bought her things. He had curated a professional studio. There were 3 heavy-duty easels, a large H-frame for massive canvases, a more flexible studio easel, and a French box easel for ridiculously plein air work she would never be allowed to do. Canvases of every conceivable size were stacked neatly against one wall, from small 8x10s to a truly intimidating 7x9-foot monolith, all pre-stretched with the finest Belgian linen. A massive, flat file cabinet dominated another wall, no doubt filled with paper, charcoal, watercolor, vellum. But it was the paint that made her want to weep. It wasn't a student starter kit. It was an arsenal. An entire wall was fitted with racks holding tubes of oil paint. Not just one brand, but the best. Old Holland. Michael Harding. Williamsburg. Colors she had only ever dreamed of affording. Pigments she'd read about but never touched. Lapis lazuli. Genuine vermilion. Lead white. There were jars of pigment, bottles of linseed, walnut, and poppy oil. Galkid, Gamsol, Damar varnish. There were brushes, hundreds of them, it seemed, in earthenware jars, organized by shape and material. Polinsky sables, stiff hog bristles, soft synthetics for blending. This was not a gift. It was a statement. It was a gilded cage, but the cage itself was made of the finest materials imaginable. It was a demand. I have given you heaven. Now create. A small, cold knot of dread formed in her stomach. What had her father told them? She's an artist. She's good. How good did a monster like Mikhail Volkov expect her to be for the price of $5 million? She found a small, 16x20 canvas and set it on the easel. Her hands were shaking. She had no commission, no brief, no poodle to paint. There was only the blank white linen and the suffocating pressure of his command. She squeezed out a dollop of titanium white, ultramarine blue, and burnt umber. She picked up a palette knife, the weight of it familiar and comforting. She started to mix, the scrape of the metal on the glass palette the first sound to break the penthouse's oppressive silence. She would not paint for him. She would paint for herself. She would paint her way out of this, even if only inside her own head. She thought of the view from her old apartment, the sliver of city visible between 2 brick buildings, the way the light hit the rusted fire escape at dusk. She began to sketch it out with a thin wash of umber, her arms stiff, her mind screaming. It was terrible, lifeless, a mechanical reproduction of a memory. The pressure was too much. The light was wrong, the silence was wrong, the smell was wrong. It smelled of new wood and expensive solvents, not the comforting, familiar tang of her own chaotic studio. She wiped it down with a turpentine-soaked rag, the sharp scent clearing her head for a moment. Start again. She took a deep breath. She would paint the storm. She looked out the massive skylight, at the churning, bruised clouds. She grabbed a larger brush, her movements becoming more frantic, more desperate. She began to block in the sky, not with delicacy, but with a raw, angry energy. She layered dark blues, Payne's gray, and injected a sickening sliver of Naples yellow at the horizon. She worked for hours. Time ceased to have meaning. There was only the paint, the canvas, and the storm inside her that matched the one outside. A servant, a quiet woman in a gray uniform, entered at some point, placing a tray of food and water on a small table. Katya didn't even see her. She only registered the smell of fresh bread hours later, when it was cold. She was fighting with a patch of cloud, the gray refusing to blend, becoming a muddy, overworked mess. "You're pressing too hard," a voice said. Katya screamed. She spun around, her heart trying to hammer its way out of her chest. Her brush, loaded with gray paint, clattered to the floor. Mikhail Volkov was standing just inside the studio doorway. She hadn't heard him enter. He was as silent as the rest of this concrete tomb. He wore a simple black t-shirt and dark trousers, and he was holding a glass of water. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the canvas. You're not supposed to be in here?" She burst out, the words ripped from her. It was a stupid, childish thing to say. He owned her. He owned the air she breathed. Mikhail didn't answer. He took a slow, deliberate step into the room. Then another. He moved with that same heavy, predatory grace, his pale gray eyes fixed on her work. "This is my space," she said, her voice trembling but fierce. She gestured at the canvas. "This is private." He stopped about 10 feet away from her. He finally looked at her, his gaze flat and unreadable. He made no move to apologize, no move to leave. He just watched. Katya's face burned. She felt violated. This, the messy, raw, frustrating process of creation, was the only part of her that was left, and he was here in it, a silent, critical spectator. "Get out," she whispered, knowing it was futile. He didn't move. He just looked at the canvas. He looked at the muddy, overworked patch of gray. He looked at her. "What?" she finally snapped, her terror and frustration boiling over into pure, reckless rage. "Is it not good enough for you? Is this not worth $5 million? I'm sorry. Did you expect a masterpiece on day one? Or did you just come to watch the little bird paint in her pretty cage?" Her voice was shrill, echoing in the large, quiet room. She was shaking from the adrenaline, horrified at her own audacity. This man killed people. He had stolen her life, and she was yelling at him. Mikhail Volkov simply stared. The silence stretched, pulled taut by her outburst. She expected a blow. She expected him to cross the room and silence her with his hand, either on her throat or across her face. He did nothing. He held her gaze for a long, agonizing 10 seconds. There was no anger in his eyes. No, anything. It was like shouting at a mountain. Then, slowly, he turned his head and looked back at the canvas. He pointed a single, large finger at the muddy spot. "You used too much white," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You corrupted the pigment. You should have waited for the umber underpainting to dry." Katya stared at him, dumbfounded. He wasn't just looking. He was seeing. He knew about underpainting. He knew about pigment. He held her stunned gaze for another moment, then turned, his heavy shoulders framed in the doorway, and left, as silently as he had arrived. Katya was left alone, her heart pounding against her ribs, the smell of turpentine sharp in her lungs. She looked at her palette, then at the canvas. He was right. She had contaminated her gray by mixing it into the still wet, white heavy base. She had been impatient. She picked up her palette knife and with a vicious scraping sound, removed the entire patch of offending paint. She would start that section again. And this time, she would wait. Chapter 3. A week passed, or perhaps it was a month. Time in the penthouse was a flat, sterile loop. There was no night or day, only the ever-changing light in her studio. The sun rose, turning the cityscape from bruised purple to a harsh metallic gray. The sun set, and the city became a river of diamonds, a cold, beautiful fire that she was trapped above. Katya painted. She painted with a feverish, desperate energy, because to stop painting was to stop breathing. To stop painting was to sit in the crushing, brutalist silence and be forced to think. To think about her father, free and broken, living with the knowledge of what he had sold. To think about her own future, a blank canvas that did not belong to her. She finished the storm. She attacked the canvas until the clouds looked ready to tear open and drown the world. She signed it, K. Petrenko, in the bottom right corner with a defiant flick of her rigger brush. It was hers. She started a new piece. A still life. She had gone into the sterile, black granite kitchen, a place she was implicitly allowed to be, though she never saw anyone cook, and gathered a pomegranate, a silver knife, and a glass of water. It was an exercise in pure, cold technicality. She would render the waxy, blood-red skin of the fruit. She would capture the precise, distorted reflection in the curve of the blade. She would paint the light, not the shadow. The staff remained ghosts. The silent woman, who Katya learned was named Anya, would appear with trays of food, simple, nourishing, expensive food, and disappear without a word. Her old clothes were gone. Her drawers now filled with a curated, minimalist wardrobe of cashmere, silk, and soft cotton in shades of black, gray, and ivory. A prisoner's uniform, chosen by a man with impeccable taste. And then there was Mikhail. He was the penthouse's true shadow. He was an absence more profound than any presence, until he chose not to be. He returned to the studio 2 days after her first outburst. She was sketching the still life, her charcoal stick whispering across the linen, when the air pressure in the room changed. She didn't have to look. She could feel his stillness behind her. He brought a chair. It was a simple, Bauhaus-inspired black leather and steel chair. He placed it in the corner of the studio, a spot that gave him a clear view of her easel, but kept him just outside her direct line of sight. And he sat. Katya's spine went rigid. Every nerve ending screamed. It was impossible. It was like trying to paint with a wolf in the room. She tried to ignore him. She focused on the curve of the pomegranate, the hard, reflective edge of the knife. But she could hear him. The faint shush of his breathing. The almost imperceptible creak of the leather as he shifted his weight. He was just watching. She worked for an hour, her shoulders aching with tension, her hand cramping around the charcoal. The drawing was tight, lifeless. His silence was a critique, a heavy, suffocating judgment. "Do you have nothing better to do?" she snapped, not turning around. "Don't you have a criminal empire to run? People to hurt?" The silence stretched. She heard him inhale, slowly. "I am running it," he rumbled. She turned. He was looking at his phone, his thumb scrolling slowly down a screen she couldn't see. He was running his bloody organization from her studio, using her as What? Background noise? A stress toy? A piece of living art in his collection? Then go run it somewhere else. I can't work like this. He locked his phone and placed it face down on his knee. His pale, cold eyes met hers. You are working. I am not, she seethed, gesturing to the stiff, awkward drawing. This is nothing. This is a technical exercise by a terrified student. It's dead. You've killed it. Your presence is killing it. Mikhail Volkov considered this, his head tilting slightly. He seemed not offended, but intrigued, as if she were a scientific curiosity. You are painting, he corrected her, his voice flat. You are painting what you see. The fruit. The knife. It is accurate. Art isn't about accuracy, she cried, throwing the charcoal stick down. It shattered on the concrete floor. It's about life. It's about feeling. And the only thing I feel in this room right now is you, and it's making me want to scrape the canvas bare. He said nothing. He simply looked at her, his face a mask of cold neutrality. He wasn't going to leave. Rage, hot and potent, flooded her. It was so powerful it burned away the edges of her fear. She was a prisoner. She was a possession. But she would be damned if she let him break her craft. Fine, she spat. You want to watch? Watch. She turned back to the easel. She grabbed a fresh canvas, a larger one. She ripped the failed still life drawing off and threw it into the corner. She wouldn't paint the dead fruit. She would paint him, not his face. Not yet. She would paint the feeling of him. She grabbed a wide 4-inch brush. She grabbed the tube of Payne's gray, a blue-black, as cold and deep as a bruise. She squeezed a massive amount onto her glass palette. She mixed it with Gamsol until it was a thin, transparent wash. She attacked the canvas. She didn't sketch. She painted with her whole arm, her whole body, letting the rage guide her. She slashed a heavy, dark vertical line down the center of the canvas. Him, the watcher, the Pakhan. She began to build shadows around it, dark, oppressive, chaotic shapes that pressed in on the central line. It was the penthouse. It was the cage. She worked for hours. She was covered in paint. Her breath came in ragged gasps. She was no longer performing. She was processing. She was taking the terror and the silence and the cold fury, and she was putting it somewhere. She was giving it a shape. The silence from the corner was absolute. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. He just watched her. She needed a different black. Not the blue-black of Payne's gray. She needed a void, a true light-eating black, Mars black. She spun to her paint cart, her eyes scanning the racks. She had every color, it seemed, but that. She had ivory black. She had lamp black, but not the heavy, opaque Mars black. A guttural sound of frustration ripped from her throat. She started pulling out drawers, her movements frantic. It wasn't there. You don't have it. His voice so close made her jump. He was standing right behind her. He must have moved when her back was turned, as silent as smoke. She backed away, her heart leaping into her throat. He was so large, he crowded her, his shadow falling over the paint cart. I need Mars black, she said, her voice a low, trembling snarl. He looked at the abstract, violent mess she had made on the canvas. He looked at the chaos of her palette. He looked back at her, his eyes tracing the smudge of gray paint on her jaw. Ivory black is warmer, he said. Lamp black is cooler. You want the one with no temperature, the one that eats the light. Yes, she whispered, stunned again by his knowledge. He turned from her and walked to the massive wall of supplies. He opened a flat file drawer she had assumed was for paper. It was not. It was a perfectly organized, climate-controlled tray of pigments, oils, and rare, custom-made paints in metal tins. His large, calloused hand, a hand she knew could break bones, moved with delicate precision. He selected a large, unlabeled tin from the back. He brought it to her. He opened it. Inside was a black, so dark, so velvety, it seemed to pull the light from the room. It was custom milled, he said, for the Rothko. He was referring to the furious $1 million painting in his living room. He had a personal, custom-milled supply of its black. He placed the tin on her tabouret, a offering, a reminder. She looked at the tin. She looked at him. This was a test. This was another demonstration of his absolute ownership. He owned the paint. He owned the light. He owned her. She expected to feel fury. She expected to feel humiliated. Instead, she felt a strange, cold, terrifying pull. He understood. The man who had bought her like cattle, who held her captive in his glass tower, was the only person she had ever met who understood, on a primal, pigment-deep level, what she needed. She dipped her palette knife into the tin. The paint was thick, like black butter. She spread it on her palette. "You'll sit," she said. It was not a question. It was a command, as sharp and as brutal as any of his. Mikhail Volkov's eyes widened, just a fraction. It was the first true emotion she had ever seen from him. Surprise. "You want me to watch?" she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. "You want to sit in my space and breathe my air? Fine. But you won't be a shadow in the corner. You will be a subject." She grabbed the shattered piece of charcoal from the floor. She pointed it at the high-backed stool she used when she was tired. "Sit." "Don't move. I'm going to paint you." He stared at her. The silence in the room was no longer his. It was hers. It was the held breath before the first cut of the knife. Slowly, deliberately, Mikhail, the silent Volkov, walked to the stool and sat down. He faced her, his pale eyes unblinking, his brutalist face cast in the perfect gray light of the storm. And Katya, her heart hammering a wild, terrified, triumphant rhythm, began to paint the monster who had bought her. Chapter 4. The command hung in the air, a physical, shimmering thing. "Sit." Katya's heart hammered a frantic, suffocating rhythm against her ribs. The adrenaline from her outburst was still screaming through her veins. She had just given an order to Mikhail Volkov. She had pointed at a stool and told the city's most feared man what to do. The silence that followed was not the empty, sterile silence of the penthouse. It was the coiled, electric silence of a predator deciding whether to strike. His face was a mask of cold granite. She watched his pale, unblinking eyes, searching for the explosion. For the rage, for the casual, brutal violence she knew he was capable of. It never came. With a slow, deliberate grace that was almost unnerving, Mikhail Volkov moved. He didn't look at the stool. He kept his eyes locked on her, a gaze so heavy it was almost a physical touch. He walked to the stool, the heavy, expensive wool of his trousers making no sound, and he sat. He did not slouch. He did not lounge. He sat as he did everything, with a formidable, disciplined presence. His broad shoulders were square. His large, scarred hands rested on his knees. He faced her, a king on a pauper's throne, and waited. Katya's breath, which she hadn't realized she was holding, escaped in a shaky, anemic puff. He'd done it. He'd actually obeyed. A new, different kind of terror, mingled with a wild, intoxicating thrill, shot through her. The adrenaline of defiance was replaced by the cold, sharp fire of creation. He was no longer the Pakhan. He was no longer her captor. He was a subject. He was a problem of light and shadow and the brutal geometry of his face. Don't look at me," she stammered, her voice still rough. She grabbed her easel and dragged it, the legs screeching on the concrete, until the angle was perfect. The flat, gray light from the skylight cut across his face, throwing one side into deep shadow, highlighting the sharp ridge of his brow and the white, puckered line of the scar. Look at the corner. Over my shoulder. At the crack in the concrete. His gaze shifted. It was a minute, almost imperceptible movement. But it was another act of obedience. Her hands were shaking. She couldn't paint like this, not with oils. She would waste the custom-milled black. She needed to map him first. She needed to learn him. She grabbed the sketch pad, tore off the failed abstract, and propped a new, large sheet of heavy-toothed charcoal paper on the easel. She held the stick of charcoal, the one she had not shattered, and took her first real, assessing look at Mikhail Volkov. She had seen him as a monster, a shadow, a collector. Now she saw him as an artist. His face was a fortress. It was all harsh planes and brutal structure, a cartography of a life she couldn't imagine. His jaw was wide, his chin square. His nose was straight, clearly broken at least once. But it was his eyes. They were the color of the storm she had just painted. Deep, cold, and utterly devoid of reflection. He was a man who had perfected the art of showing nothing. She began to draw. The only sound in the studio for the next hour was the whisper and scrape of the willow charcoal against the paper. She didn't work with tentative, feathery strokes. She attacked the page. She used the side of the stick, laying in broad, dark planes of shadow, carving out the light with a kneaded eraser. She was not drawing a man, she was drawing his defenses. He was the most difficult subject she had ever had. Not because he fidgeted, he was preternaturally still, a statue of disciplined violence, but because he was empty. He had retreated so far behind the mask that she was drawing the mask itself, not the man. "You're not breathing," she said, her voice sharp with the familiar frustration of a difficult session. He didn't move. But she saw the faintest flare of his nostrils. "No, you're not," she insisted, stepping back from the easel. The drawing was accurate, but it was dead. It was a photograph. It had no life. "You're holding your breath. You're bracing, like you're waiting for a bullet." "I can't paint a man waiting for a bullet. It's static." His eyes flicked to her, cold and dangerous. "This is a waste of your time." "It's my time to waste." "You bought it, remember?" she retorted, the words out before she could stop them. A muscle in his jaw jumped. That was it. The first flicker. The first sign that there was, in fact, something living behind the granite. "You're doing it again," she pushed, emboldened, clenching your jaw. "You sit in that chair in the corner and you watch me. You watch me mix paint. You watch me clean my brushes. You watch me think. Now I am watching you and you can't stand it. Can you?" "I am sitting," he growled, the word a low vibration. "You are hiding," she yelled, and she was no longer a prisoner shouting at her jailer. She was an artist, furious with a subject who would not yield. "I am trying to find you, and you are hiding behind this nothing. You sit in my studio, you bring me $1 million paints, you know the difference between ivory and Mars black. You are in here, so be here." She was panting, her chest heaving. The studio was ringing with the echo of her voice. She had just screamed at the Pakhan of the Volkov Bratva. Again. Mikhail Volkov's stillness became absolute. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. He looked at her, and for a second she saw him. Not the subject. The monster. The man who had taken this city in a bloody coup. She saw the violence he held leashed, and she knew with sickening certainty that he could cross the room and end her before her next breath. She did not back down. She held her ground, her hand gripping the charcoal stick so hard it would surely snap. They stared at each other. A duel. The silence stretched for a full minute. Then Mikhail did something that shattered her completely. He let out a breath. It was not a sigh. It was a heavy, shuddering exhalation, the sound of a man setting down a weight he had been carrying for a lifetime. His massive shoulders, which had been braced for impact, settled. The tension in his jaw bled away. He closed his eyes just once, and when he opened them, the Pakhan was gone. The man who looked at her now was not a monster. He was something far more terrifying. He was a man who was exhausted, haunted, and so profoundly, deeply quiet, he seemed to be at the bottom of an ocean. The noise she sensed in him was gone, and what was left was this terrible, hollow peace. "What do you see?" he asked. His voice was not a rumble, it was a whisper. Katya's own breath hitched. This was it. This was the man behind the mask. She turned back to her easel, her hands flying. "Don't move," she whispered, her voice thick. She didn't need to tell him. He was no longer a statue. He was present. She worked in a creative frenzy. She abandoned the lines and focused on the shadows. The shadow under his eye that wasn't just shadow, it was weariness. The tension in his upper lip. The way the scar wasn't a mark of violence, but a line that interrupted the profound sadness of his expression. She saw him. She saw the man who was more comfortable with chaos and paint than with his own life. She saw the collector who caged beautiful things because he was caged himself. She worked until her arm burned, until her fingers were numb, until the paper was saturated with charcoal, graphite, and the angry, smudged white of the eraser. Finally, she stepped back. It was done. The sketch. It was not a portrait. It was an interrogation. It was raw, brutal, and unflinchingly true. She had captured the fortress, but she had also captured the prisoner inside it. She was panting, slick with sweat under the cashmere. The studio was dark. The rain had stopped, and the city lights were a glittering, indifferent smear beyond the glass. She didn't know how long they had been there. Mikhail hadn't moved. He was still in the pose, still there for her. "You can... stop," she said, her voice hoarse. He blinked, as if waking from a trance. The mask slid back into place, the shields raising, but it was too late. She had seen him. He stood up, rolling his shoulders, the sound of his joints cracking loud in the quiet room. He walked over to the easel. He was the Pakhan again, huge and intimidating, his shadow falling over her work. He stood beside her, shoulder to shoulder, and looked at what she had made. She watched his face, terrified. He would hate it. He would see it as a weakness, an exposure. He would destroy it. And then he would destroy her. He looked at the drawing for a long time. His eyes traced the harsh, dark lines she had used to define his jaw, the deep, hollowed-out shadows of his eyes. He lifted his hand, the one with the scarred knuckles, and pointed, his finger stopping just millimeters from the paper. He indicated the white, jagged line of his scar. "You didn't see the scar," he said, his voice flat. Katya's brow furrowed. "What?" It's right there." "I drew it." "No," he said, and his voice was a low, strange thing. A new sound. It was respect. "You didn't draw the scar. You drew the way the bone under it was crushed. You drew the structure. You saw why it healed that way." He looked from the drawing to her, and his cold, gray eyes were no longer assessing her. They were seeing her. He wasn't looking at the prisoner. He was looking at the artist. Mikhail Volkov nodded once. A sharp, definitive gesture of acknowledgement. He turned and walked out of the studio, his footsteps echoing in the vast, empty penthouse. Katya was left alone, her hands black with charcoal, her entire body trembling from the profound, terrifying intimacy of what had just passed between them. She had yelled at him. She had exposed him. And he had, in his own silent, brutal way, thanked her for it. The rules of her captivity had just been rewritten. She wasn't just his property. She was the only person in the world who had ever truly seen him. Chapter 5. Katya didn't sleep. She sat in the cavernous, dark living room, wrapped in a cashmere throw blanket, staring at the river of city lights below. She was staring, but she was seeing only the drawing. It was still in the studio, propped on the easel, a ghost of charcoal and rage. She had captured him. She had stripped him bare with a piece of burnt wood, and he had let her. More than that, he had acknowledged her. You saw the way the bone was crushed. His words echoed in the silence, more potent and terrifying than any threat. He had looked at her creation and seen truth. He had seen her. Anya, the silent housekeeper, had found her there at dawn, curled up on the massive, uncomfortable modern sofa. She had placed a cup of hot, black coffee on the steel table in front of Katya and vanished, her face as impassive as ever. Katya drank it, the bitter heat a welcome shock. She was sore. Her arm, her shoulders, her back, all ached from the physical, frantic energy of the drawing session. It was the familiar, satisfying pain of hard work, but it was tainted. It was complicated. She was a prisoner. He was a monster who had bought her. He was her jailer. And he was, she admitted with a cold, sickening lurch in her stomach, the most powerful muse she had ever known. She dreaded going back to the studio. What was the new protocol? What happened after you excavated a man's soul? Did you make small talk? Did he go back to being a shadow in the corner? Would the Pakhan be there? The mask of granite firmly back in place, pretending the previous night had never happened? The not knowing was a new kind of torture. She forced herself to shower, the water scalding hot, and dressed in the prisoner's uniform of gray leggings and a black sweater. She walked to the studio, her feet heavy. She braced herself, pushing the heavy door open. The room was empty. The chair was gone, the stool was back in its corner, and her drawing. Her drawing was also gone. Katya's blood ran cold. She rushed to the easel. It was bare. She looked around the room, her heart pounding. Had he destroyed it? Had he seen it in the light of day and realized how much she had exposed? She spun around, and that's when she saw it. It was on the far wall, the one solid concrete wall in the studio. It had been professionally framed under museum-quality non-reflective glass in a simple, severe black frame. It was hung with perfect precision, centered on the wall, lit by a single focused gallery light from the ceiling. He hadn't destroyed her work. He had curated it. He had hung it in her own studio like a trophy, a prize, a declaration. This is what I want. This is what you will give me. It's a good likeness. She didn't jump this time. She felt him. He was in the doorway, and the air in the room was thick with his presence. He was holding the black leather Bauhaus chair. She stared at the framed drawing. You framed it. Good work should be protected, he rumbled. He walked past her, not to the corner, but to the exact spot where the stool had been. He placed the chair, angled it toward the main easel, and sat. He was in his Pakhan suit again, a dark, impeccably tailored charcoal gray. The mask was back. His face was all cold planes and neutral assessment. But he was here. And he was in the chair. He was, without a word, offering himself back to her. Katya looked at him. She looked at the framed drawing. She looked at the massive 7-by-9-foot blank canvas she had considered using for his abstract. Not that one, she said, her voice rough. His eyebrow twitched. She grabbed a different canvas, a 30-by-40, a portrait size. She slammed it onto the easel. This one, for now. She would not do a sketch. She would paint. She would take his custom-milled, light-eating black, and she would render the man who had dared to frame her work in her own cage. She began to paint. And so, the silent arrangement found its new, strange, suffocating rhythm. Every morning he would arrive, sometimes at 10, sometimes at noon. He would sit in the chair. He would not read. He would not use his phone. He would simply sit, his pale eyes fixed on her, and he would let her look. She worked with a frantic intensity. She was no longer just his prisoner. She was his artist, and he was, in turn, her subject. The dynamic was a tangled, toxic, and deeply intimate knot. She painted his underpainting in raw umber, mapping the fortress of his face, just as she had with the charcoal. He sat for hours, unmoving. She began to lay in the color, the pale, almost translucent quality of his skin, the cold gray of his eyes, the white slash of the scar. And she began to get angry. It wasn't the explosive rage of their first sessions. It was the slow, simmering, familiar frustration of the work. The paint wasn't cooperating. The light was shifting. The color of the shadow under his jaw was wrong. It was too purple. It needed more green, more death. "Damn it!" she hissed, scraping the patch off with her palette knife. She mixed again. "Still wrong. It's too clean. It's not." She growled, a low, frustrated sound. Mikhail just watched, his stillness a perfect counterpoint to her barely contained chaos. "It's you!" she finally snapped, pointing the brush at him. "You're doing it again. You're not here. You're sitting there, but you're a million miles away. I can't paint a ghost." "I am here," he stated, his voice flat. "No. You're just waiting. You're waiting for me to be done. I can't paint that. I'm trying to find what I found the other night, and you've locked it away." She was ranting, more to the canvas than to him. She threw the brush, loaded with muddy paint, into the solvent can. It hit with a clank and a splash of turpentine. "I can't paint this. This is a shell." She paced, her hands covered in paint, which she then wiped through her hair, not caring. She was a mess of frustration and creative block, and he just sat there watching her fail. "Why do you even do this?" she demanded, spinning on him. "Why do you sit here? What do you get out of it? Is this part of the price? To watch me slowly go insane?" Mikhail Volkov's expression did not change. He was the mountain. She was the storm breaking against him. And his lack of retaliation, his absolute unshakable stillness, was the most maddening and, she hated to admit, grounding thing she had ever experienced. She could rage, she could scream, she could throw her tools, and he would not strike her. He would not yell, he would just be. He absorbed her chaos. Before he could answer, a harsh, demanding buzz vibrated from his jacket pocket. It was not the polite chime of his personal phone. It was an alarm. Mikhail's entire demeanor shifted. The subject was gone. The mask was gone. In their place was the Pakhan. His body tensed, and he pulled a second, different phone from his pocket. A simple, hardened burner. He looked at the screen, and his pale eyes went flat, all traces of life or stillness gone, replaced by an arctic cold. He answered. He didn't say hello. "Da." He listened. Katya stood frozen, her palette knife dripping. He spoke in Russian. She didn't understand a single word, but she understood the sound. His voice was not a rumble. It was a blade. It was sharp, cold, and utterly brutal. He gave a series of short, guttural commands. There was no negotiation. There was no emotion. It was the sound of a man moving pieces on a bloody board. He gave one final, one-word order that sounded like ustranit. Then he hung up. He put the burner phone back in his pocket. The silence that filled the studio was terrifying. It was the silence of the Krasnaya Dama. It was the silence of her father's weeping. The man in the chair was not her muse. He was the monster. Katya was breathing heavily, her fear a cold, metallic taste in her mouth. Mikhail looked at her. The Pakhan was still there, his eyes like chips of ice. He saw her. He saw her fear. And he saw the half-finished, failing portrait on her easel. He stood. The session was over. The real world had intruded. He walked past her, his footsteps heavy. She flinched as he passed, but he didn't stop. He walked to her paint cart. She tensed, thinking he would sweep it to the floor. Instead, he looked at the mess of her palette, at the muddy, failed shadow color she had scraped away. He looked at the tubes she had been using. His large hand, the one she had seen grip a phone with such killing intent, moved with the same slow precision as before. He picked up a tube of viridian green. He picked up another, alizarin crimson. He didn't look at her. He placed the two tubes on the clean edge of her glass palette, side by side. Then he turned and left the studio, the heavy door clicking shut behind him, leaving her alone with the two colors. Katya stared. Green and red, opposites, complements. When mixed, they would kill each other's vibrancy, creating a deep, complex, near black. A shadow color, a living shadow. He had heard her frustration, he had seen her technical problem, and in the midst of running his bloody, violent world, he had stopped to give her the solution. She picked up her palette knife, her hand shaking, and pulled a small amount of each color, mixing them together. It was perfect. Chapter 6. The portrait became her obsession. It was her war, her prayer, her entire suffocating world. The new rhythm held for weeks. He would arrive, sit, and she would paint. The silence was their shared language, punctuated only by the scrape of her knife, the hiss of a brush against linen, or her own muttered curses. "Your left eye it's lazy," she announced one afternoon. He was sitting in the chair, a column of gray stillness. He had been there for 3 hours, and the light was beginning to fade. "It's not," he rumbled. "It is," she insisted, stepping back, her head tilted. "Not lazy, that's the wrong word. It's heavier. The lid. It's lower than the right. It's skeptical." He said nothing. He just watched her. "And your mouth? You think your mouth is neutral, but it's not. The right corner pulls down, just a fraction of a millimeter. But it's there. It's a tell, it's contempt." "I do not feel contempt," he stated. "I don't care what you feel," she shot back, dabbing a tiny, precise highlight onto his lower lip. "I care what I see. And I see a man who holds the entire world in contempt. And you?" His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. "Do I hold you in contempt, Katya?" Her brush stopped, hovering over the palette. It was the first time he had used her name since the night he'd bought her. It sounded strange in his mouth, a rough, foreign-sounding word. Katya. She looked at him, really looked, not as a collection of planes and shadows, but as the man who sat in her studio, who had custom-milled paint for her, who had obeyed her. "No," she said, her voice dropping, suddenly raw. "No, not contempt. I don't know what you feel, you just watch." "I watch," he agreed. "Why?" The question was torn from her, a whisper. "Why me? Why this? You could have anything, any woman. You could have just taken the 5 million. You're the Pakhan, you do what you want." He was silent for a long moment, his gray eyes fixed on her. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, filled with the things he wouldn't or couldn't say. "I do," he said finally. I do what I want. I want this. He gestured, a small, subtle movement of his scarred hand, encompassing the studio, the canvas, her. This, the quiet, the creation, the antithesis of the blood and noise that defined his world. You're a collector, she said, turning back to the canvas, her hand shaking. I'm just the most expensive piece in your gallery. You are not in the gallery, he said, and his voice was so low it was almost inaudible. You are in the studio. It is different. This, she realized, was the most profound admission he was capable of. The art in his penthouse, the Rothko, the Giacometti, was finished. It was dead. It was property. This, her work, her process, was alive. And for reasons she couldn't fathom, he needed to be near it. He needed to watch it happen. The work was brutal. He was an impossible subject, and the more she painted him, the more she saw. She saw the layers of control. She saw the iron discipline that held him together. And she saw, beneath it all, the well of darkness he was so clearly drowning in. One day, she was failing. Utterly. The portrait, which had been so close to life the day before, was now just a painting, a technical exercise. The spark was gone. It was just oil and linen. It's dead, she growled, throwing her rag onto the tabouret. It's dead, it's dead, it's dead. She paced the studio, a caged, frantic energy thrumming through her. She was trapped. Trapped in the penthouse, trapped in this arrangement, and now trapped by her own failing talent. I can't breathe in here, she suddenly yelled. She was yelling at him, at the concrete walls, at the city below. The air it's recycled, it's stale. I need light, real light. I need a sky that isn't filtered through 3 inches of ballistic glass. She was ranting, spiraling, her frustration with the painting twisting into a raw, claustrophobic panic. I can't paint you. I can't paint anything. It's all fake. This room is fake. The light is fake. You are fake. She grabbed the solvent can, her hands shaking, and she was going to throw it. At the painting. At him. She didn't care. She needed to destroy something. Katya? His voice was not a command. It was a lock, a key. It stopped her. Her arm was raised, turpentine sloshing in the metal can. Set it down, he said, his voice calm, level. No, she screamed, tears of pure, impotent rage stinging her eyes. You get to sit there so quiet, so controlled. While I have to tear myself open every day for you. I have to bleed onto this canvas, and it's not good enough. It's never good enough. And you just sit there. She was heaving, breathless. She was truly, dangerously unhinged. She was a woman with nothing to lose, threatening the one man who held her life in his hands. Mikhail Volkov stood up. She flinched, bracing for the impact, her hand tightening on the can. He was going to hit her. He was going to end this. He didn't move toward her. He walked to the massive, floor-to-ceiling glass wall that overlooked the city. He touched a small, almost invisible panel on the steel frame. There was a hiss of depressurizing air, a series of heavy mechanical thunks. And then, a 4-foot section of the ballistic glass slid open. The sound of the city rushed in. It was deafening. The roar of traffic from 30 stories below. The wail of a distant siren. The cold, wet wind of the November afternoon. It wasn't the sterile, recycled air of the penthouse. It was real. It was damp, and it smelled of exhaust and rain and the river. Katya stood, frozen, the can still in her hand. Mikhail walked to the opening. The wind whipped his dark hair, plastering the fine wool of his suit against his body. He was just a silhouette against the harsh, gray light of the real, unfiltered sky. He stood there for a long, silent moment, breathing it in. He turned to her. The monster was gone. The Pakhan was gone. The still, hollow subject was gone. It was the man from the first night of the sketch. The one who had let his breath go. He looked at her, and his face was raw. "You yelled?" he said, his voice almost carried away by the wind. She stammered, lowering her arm. The can felt suddenly, stupidly heavy. "You yell," he said again, a strange, profound realization dawning on his face. He looked out at the city, then back at her. "No one yells at me. I'm sorry. Quote. "No," he said, and he sounded not angry, not happy. He sounded alive. "It's quiet, my world, it's too quiet. People are afraid, they whisper, they lie." He looked at her paint-streaked face, her wild hair, the can of turpentine in her hand. "You are not quiet," he said. She didn't know what to say. She had just had a complete, violent breakdown. And he had opened a window. "You get angry?" he continued, as if talking to himself. "At the paint, at the light, at me, your frustration. It is loud, it is real." He looked back out at the city. "It helps. The noise." Katya finally understood. She had it all backward. He wasn't sitting in her studio despite her chaos. He was there for it. He wasn't a collector who wanted a beautiful, finished object. He was a man drowning in a silent, bloody world. And he was using her. Her rage, her frustration, her loud, messy, creative process, as a lifeline. Her art wasn't soothing the beast. Her chaos was. She slowly walked to the tabaret and set the turpentine can down. Her hands were shaking. She walked to the open window, stopping a few feet behind him. The wind was bitingly cold, and it felt incredible. It felt real. "The portrait is failing," she whispered, her throat tight. "I know," he rumbled, not turning. "It's because I'm painting you as a statue. As the Pakhan. The man in the chair. But that's not what you are. Not in here." He turned to face her. They were standing a few feet apart, the roaring, wet wind of the city swirling around them in her studio. "What am I?" he asked. "You're my muse," she said, and the admission tasted like poison and surrender. "And I hate you for it." A ghost of a smile, so faint it was barely there, touched the corner of his mouth. The corner that, she had noted, always pulled down in contempt. Now it pulled up. "Then paint that," he said. He walked past her, hit the panel, and the window slid shut with a heavy, sealing thud. The silence of the tomb rushed back in. He picked up his suit jacket, which had been draped over the Bauhaus chair. "You're leaving?" she asked, panicked. The session wasn't over. She wasn't done. "I have business," he said. The Pakhan was back. "Anya will bring you dinner." He walked to the door, but paused, his hand on the frame. He looked back at her, his face once again an impassive mask. "Do not throw the solvent," he said, his voice flat. "It is a waste of good turpentine." And he was gone. Katya was left alone, in the silence, her heart hammering. She looked at the failing portrait. She looked at the fresh, new canvas she had set aside. She grabbed her palette knife and, with a single vicious scrape, destroyed the portrait. She would start again. And this time she wouldn't paint the statue. She would paint the man who opened windows in the middle of a storm. Chapter 7. The new portrait was finished. It was, Katya knew with a cold, terrifying certainty, the best thing she had ever painted. It was nothing like the first failed attempt. This painting was alive. It was brutal. She had painted him not as a statue in a chair, but as a man caught in a storm. She had used the viridian and alizarin mix for the shadows, creating a depth that felt less like pigment and more like a bruise. She had painted him in the moments of their sessions. The flicker of his jaw when she angered him. The profound, hollowed-out exhaustion in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. The ghost of the smile he'd given her by the open window. She had captured the man, not the monster, and in doing so, she had created something monstrously revealing. It hung on the studio wall, across from the framed charcoal sketch. The sketch was an interrogation. The painting was a confession. A month had passed since he'd opened the window. Their routine had become a strange, symbiotic thing. He would sit, she would work. She no longer yelled at him. Her frustration was now a low, intense hum, channeled directly onto the canvas. She had filled the studio. She had painted a dozen new pieces, dark, atmospheric landscapes of the city from her glass prison, a new, violent still life of a shattered wine glass, and the portrait. She was cleaning her brushes, the smell of turpentine sharp in the air, when he entered. He was not in his suit. He was in the casual, dark clothes he wore when he sat for her, but he was not carrying the Bauhaus chair. "It is done," he said. It was not a question. He was looking at the portrait. "It's done," she agreed, her voice flat. She felt exposed, her heart thumping a dull, heavy rhythm. The painting was a piece of her, and he was looking at it with his collector's eyes. He stood before it for a full 5 minutes. She stayed by her sink, wiping down a palette knife, the scrape, scrape, scrape the only sound. "You have been busy," he said, his gaze sweeping over the other canvases stacked against the wall. The storm. The glass. "I have nothing else to do," she reminded him, her voice sharp. "This work. It is suffocating in here," he said, turning to her. Katya's hands stilled. "It's your prison, not mine." "A prison is a place to hold something," he said, his pale eyes unreadable. "A gallery is a place to show it. Your work deserves to be seen." Her blood went cold. "What are you talking about?" "I have arranged a solo exhibition, a gallery in the Petrogradsky district. It opens in 3 days. Katya dropped the palette knife. It clattered into the metal sink. "What? Number? Absolutely not." I can't leave. You said, you will not be you." He cut her off, as if anticipating her panic. "The artist is K. Petrova. A new discovery, an anonymous recluse funded by a private patron. Your identity is protected." She stared at him, her mind reeling. A gallery show. Her work. On real walls, under real lights, seen by real people. It was the dream she had been chasing her entire life, the one her father's debts had all but extinguished. And he was offering it to a K. Petrova. "Why?" she whispered. "Why?" He seemed for a moment confused by the question. "It is the next step. This," he gestured to the portrait, "should not be seen by only me." "And you?" she pressed, her fear coiling in her stomach. "You'll be there?" "I'll be... what? On a leash?" "I will be there," he said. "My men will be there. You will be an observer, like any other guest. You will be safe." Safe? The word was a bitter joke. But the alternative, to have this work, this soul she had poured out, remain unseen in this concrete tomb, was suddenly, physically unbearable. "Fine," she said, her voice a dry rasp. I'll go." "Good," he said. "Anya will bring you something to wear." The gallery was a world of white pain. The walls were white, the floors were white, the lights were a brilliant, sterile white that made Katya's head ache. After months in the dark, atmospheric shadows of the penthouse, the brightness was a physical assault. And the noise. The murmur of 100 voices, the clinking of champagne glasses, the sharp, confident click of heels on the polished floor. It was a roar. She felt like a deep-sea creature dragged to the surface. She was wearing a dark blue silk dress that was simpler and more expensive than anything she had ever owned. Her hair was down. She looked like a stranger. Mikhail was not with her. She had been brought in a separate car, flanked by 2 of his silent guards, the brick monoliths, who had escorted her to the door and then melted into the crowd, their ill-fitting black suits a stark contrast to the chic, artistic elite. And then she saw her work. It was breathtaking. The gallery had given her the main wall, and there, as the centerpiece, was the portrait. His portrait. It dominated the room, a vortex of shadow and vulnerability. People were clustered around it, speaking in the hushed, reverent tones of a congregation. To its left was the charcoal sketch, its brutal lines a stark counterpoint. To its right was the storm, its violence contained in a severe black frame. The other walls held her still lifes, her cityscapes, her life. She was Kay Petrova, and she was, according to the murmur she was overhearing, the most exciting, raw talent the city had seen in a decade. She drifted, a ghost at her own funeral, listening. Such power. It's almost violent. They say the artist is a recluse, never meets anyone. And the Pakhan, a woman whispered, fanning herself, looking at the portrait. My God, it's him, isn't it? Who would have the nerve? Katya turned and saw Mikhail. He was across the room, near the entrance, a glass of water in his hand. He was not looking at the art. He was looking at her. He was the patron, the collector, the jailer watching his prize on display. His sovetnik was at his side, and she saw the other 2 guards, one by the main door, one near a side exit. They weren't watching the art either. They were watching the crowd. A man approached her. He was in his 50s with a slick, silver-gray hairstyle and a politician's easy, practiced smile. He wore an immaculate dove-gray suit. Incredible, isn't it? He said, his voice smooth. He gestured to her portrait of Mikhail. Such a profound understanding of our city's new darkness. It's striking, Katya murmured, her throat dry. She wanted to move, to get away, but she was pinned by his polite reptilian gaze. I am Viktor Orlov, he said, offering a hand. She did not take it. A competitor of our host, you might say. I am fascinated by his new collection. His eyes slid from the painting to her. Especially his most recent acquisition. Ice. Pure liquid ice flooded Katya's veins. He wasn't talking about the painting. I don't know what you mean, she said, taking a step back. Oh, I think you do, Katya. Orlov purred, the name a violation. Kay Petrova. Very clever. A little on the nose, don't you think? Petrenko. Petrova. Her heart stopped. He knew. You have a remarkable talent, he continued, his smile widening, his eyes cold. Mr. Sidorov, my employer, he believes such talent should be encouraged. He believes art and artists should be shared, not hoarded. I have to go, she said, turning. She looked for Mikhail. He was still by the door, but he was watching. His head was tilted. He was assessing the threat. I'm afraid you do, Orlov said, and his hand shot out, grabbing her upper arm in a grip of steel. But you'll be coming with me. She tried to cry out, but his fingers dug in, bruising bone. Make a sound, and my associate by the door will start shooting. He's not as discriminant as Volkov's men. He'll aim for the art critics first. He began to pull her, not toward the main exit, but toward the side door she had seen one of Mikhail's guards near. Where was the guard? Another man materialized from the crowd, blocking her other side. He was the one who had been at the side door. He'd been bought. Or he was Sidorov's man all along. A gift, from Sidorov to Volkov. Orlov whispered in her ear, his breath hot and smelling of mint. A lesson about leaving your pretty things where others can see them. The second man grabbed her other arm. They were moving her, quickly, efficiently through the crowd, which parted for them, oblivious. Katya had one desperate, last-second choice. She could go silently, or she could scream. She saw Mikhail. He had started to move. He was too far. He wouldn't make it. She wouldn't be a piece of property, traded from one monster to another. She filled her lungs and screamed. It was not a word. It was a raw, primal, tearing sound of pure terror that shattered the polite murmur of the gallery. Everything stopped. The talking, the drinking, the breathing. Mikhail Volkov was no longer a guest. He was no longer her muse. He was the Pakhan. He moved. He didn't run. He crossed the 20 yards of packed gallery space in a blur of focused, brutal rage. People scattered, screaming as they finally saw the danger. Orlov, shocked by her scream, shoved her at Mikhail and fumbled inside his jacket. He was too slow. Mikhail didn't even look at Orlov. He hit the second man, the one who had held her other arm. It wasn't a punch. It was a single, devastating open palm strike to the throat. The sound of crushing cartilage, a wet, sickening crack, echoed louder than her scream. The man collapsed, his hands at his neck, making a terrible, gurgling sound. Orlov had his gun out. Mikhail grabbed the man's wrist and twisted. A high-pitched, feminine shriek filled the room. It was Orlov. The snap of his wrist breaking was sharp and final. The gun clattered to the white floor. Mikhail did not stop. He kicked the gun away, spun, and drove his knee into Orlov's stomach. The man folded, gagging. Mikhail grabbed Katya, yanking her behind him, his entire body a shield. His two remaining guards had their weapons drawn, sweeping the crowd, shouting commands. "Get down! Get down now!" The gallery was a sea of screaming, crouching people. Katya was shaking so hard her knees buckled. She was clutching the back of Mikhail's suit jacket. He smelled of soap and steel and a faint, coppery scent she realized was his own adrenaline. He was breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling. He stood over the two men, one gurgling, one weeping in pain. His Sovetnik was suddenly at her side, grabbing her arm. "This way!" Pakhan dash. "Go!" Mikhail growled, not looking back. He was still scanning, his eyes cold and flat, searching for other threats. The Sovetnik dragged Katya toward the side exit, the one her captors had been aiming for. She stumbled, looking back over her shoulder. She saw him. Mikhail Volkov, surrounded by cowering, terrified art lovers, standing over his two broken enemies. His face was not angry. It was not her haunted muse. It was the face from the casino. A mask of cold, absolute, terrifying control. The face of a man who had just shown her, and the entire world, exactly what he was. She wasn't a weakness, she was a trigger, and he had just started a war for her. The cold night air hit her as she was shoved into the back of the Maybach. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing her back in the familiar, suffocating silence. Chapter 8. The heavy, armored door of the Maybach slammed shut, and the world went silent. It was the most terrifying sound Katya had ever heard. The roar of the gallery, her own scream, the crack of the man's throat, Orlov's high-pitched shriek, the shouts of the guards, the panic of the crowd, was all sucked into a vacuum. There was only the whisper-quiet engine and the steady, rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of the windshield wipers cutting through the rain. She was in the back, alone. The Sovetnik, the man with the pitted face, sat in the front passenger seat, a silent, rigid silhouette, speaking in low, clipped Russian into a phone. Katya was shaking. It was not a delicate tremble. It was a violent, full-body ache, her teeth chattering so hard her jaw ached. The adrenaline that had held her together was gone, leaving a cold, hollow dread. Her hands, clutched in the lap of the dark blue silk, were numb. She kept hearing it. The sound. She was an artist. She lived in a world of sight, of color, of light. She had never, ever been forced to listen to such things. The wet, dense thunk of Mikhail's palm against that man's throat. It was not the clean snap of a movie. It was the sound of something vital breaking. She could still smell him. The coppery tang of his adrenaline, the scent of his soap. A scent she had come to associate with the quiet of the studio. Now, that scent was forever married to the sound of a man gurgling, drowning in his own blood on a pristine white gallery floor. Mikhail was not in the car. He was behind them, in another car, dealing with the aftermath, dealing with the war she had just seen him start. The Maybach slid into the subterranean garage. The Sovetnik opened her door. He did not offer a hand. He was a machine. "Go up," he ordered, his voice flat. "Do not leave the main room." She rode the private elevator, her reflection in the smoked glass walls a pale, wide-eyed ghost. The dress felt garish, a costume for a life that wasn't hers. The doors opened onto the familiar, tomb-like silence of the penthouse. Anya was there, her face, for the first time, showing a flicker of something, not fear, concern. She rushed forward with the cashmere throw blanket Katya always used. "Pani?" she began, reaching for her. Katya flinched, stumbling back with a choked cry. Don't touch me." She couldn't bear it. Any touch would shatter her. She backed away, wrapping her own arms around herself, and collapsed onto the massive, uncomfortable sofa. She sat there, shaking, in her ruined silk dress, staring at the glittering, indifferent city. The penthouse was no longer a studio cage. It was a fortress. And she was no longer a prisoner. She was a liability. She had no idea how long she sat. 1 hour. 3. The adrenaline was gone, and a bone-deep, paralytic terror had set in. He had killed for her. Or if not killed, he had destroyed, in public, with his bare hands, the man she yelled at, the man who sat for her, the man who brought her custom-milled paint. He was a killer. She had known it as an abstract fact. Now she knew it as a sound, as a smell. The private elevator chimed. Her entire body went rigid. The doors slid open. Mikhail Volkov entered. He was no longer her muse. He was the Pakhan. His suit jacket was gone. His white shirt was rumpled, the collar undone, and she could see a dark, ugly bruise blooming on his ribs, just above his belt. Orlov must have landed a blow she hadn't seen. His face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. His knuckles were raw and split. He didn't look at her. He stalked across the room, grabbed a heavy crystal decanter of whiskey from the bar, and poured a measure. He downed it in one, brutal swallow, his throat working. He poured another. "They knew your name," he growled. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Katya's throat was dry. He called me Katya. Petrova. Petrenko. He knew. Mikhail slammed the crystal tumbler down on the black granite, so hard she was sure it would shatter. It didn't. The crack of the glass on the stone made her jump. "This," he said, his voice a low, lethal vibration, "was a mistake." He was not looking at her. He was staring at the wall that held the Rothko, the Pollock, the wall of his dead collection. The show, he continued, was a mistake. Exposing you. Exposing. This. A mistake? Her voice was a reedy, trembling whisper, but the injustice of it burned through the fog of her fear. You gave me that. You said my work deserved to be seen. It deserved to be seen, he bit out, finally turning on her. His eyes were not the cold, still gray of her studio. They were the color of the storm she had painted. They were wild and dark and furious. Not you, the work. I let my pride. He spat the word like it was poison. I let my pride in your work override my judgment. Sidorov saw it. He saw the portrait. He saw you. He saw you, she whispered, and the realization hit her with the force of his blow in the gallery. That's what this is. He didn't just see me. He saw you in that painting. He saw what I saw. He saw your... Silence! He roared, and the force of it hit her like a physical slap. He was across the room in 2 strides. He didn't touch her. He grabbed the heavy steel side table next to the sofa and, with a guttural cry of pure, unrestrained rage, threw it. It smashed into the concrete wall, 20 feet away, the metal legs twisting with a sickening, groaning crunch. Katya screamed, curling into a ball, her hands over her head. He was breathing like a bull, his chest heaving. He stood over her, a terrifying, violent shadow. She was trapped, waiting for the blow. He knew. Mikhail panted, his voice raw. He knew you were the artist. He knew you were... mine. He saw the intimacy of the portrait and he knew. I didn't just hang your work in a gallery, Katya. I painted a target on your back. I painted it on my back. I showed him my weakness. I am not weak, she sobbed into her knees, her terror finally breaking. No, he said, and his voice was suddenly, terrifyingly quiet. He dropped to his haunches in front of her. He was still the Pakhan, still radiating violence, but the rage was pointed inward. He was destroying himself. You are not. You are. You are the only thing that is real. And I took you. And I put you on a wall for my enemies to see. He reached out, his hand shaking, his raw, split knuckles inches from her face. She flinched. His hand stopped. He looked at his own fist, at the blood and bruised skin, as if he didn't recognize it. He lowered it, clenching it at his side. In the studio, he whispered, his voice broken. You yell, you make noise, you throw your brushes, it stops the noise. The noise in your head, she whispered, remembering. Duh, he breathed. The calculations, the moves, the blood, it's always so loud in my head. But when I watch you, when you are fighting with the paint, your noise is... it's better. It's quiet. He looked at her, and the Pakhan was gone. The monster was gone. It was the man from the sketch, the man from the open window, hollowed out, haunted, and utterly, terrifyingly lost. Tonight, he said, his voice cracking, at the gallery, when I saw Orlov, when he touched you, your scream. He closed his eyes. It joined the other noise. It is in my head now. It is the loudest. She saw it then. His torment. The gift he had tried to give her had become his new hell. The sound of her terror was now a permanent part of the darkness he was trying to hold at bay. What happens now? She asked, her voice small. He opened his eyes. They were flat, dead. The decision had been made. Now, you are erased. Kay Petrova is gone. The paintings, they will be returned. The gallery is closed. Sidorov and Orlov are being dealt with. And me? You are safer here than you have ever been, he said, and it sounded like a death sentence. You will never leave this penthouse again. You will not go near the windows. The staff will be doubled. No one will ever see you. No one will ever know you exist. He was not just putting her back in the cage, he was sealing it in a vault. You are a prisoner again, she whispered, the last of her fight draining away. You were always a prisoner, he said, his voice flat. He stood up, looming over her. But you were my prisoner. Now, you are my secret, and I will kill anyone who tries to find you. He turned and walked, not to his room, but to the spiral staircase. He walked up to the mezzanine, his heavy feet echoing in the broken silence. He didn't go to his room, he went to hers. He went to the studio. Katya sat and listened as the heavy wooden door of her studio opened and then shut, sealing him inside, alone, with her work. He had left her in the ruins of the living room and had taken refuge in the only sanctuary they had built, the one he had just destroyed. Chapter 9. The silence that followed was no longer a void. It was a grave. For 3 days, Katya did not see him. The penthouse, once her gilded cage, had transformed into a high-security vault. The 2-story glass walls were now obscured. At the touch of a button Katya hadn't known existed, heavy, dark gray steel shutters had descended from the ceiling, sealing them in. They locked into place with the heavy, final thud of a bank vault closing. The only light was artificial, the same cold, sterile gallery light that had illuminated her work. It was a world of concrete and steel, shadows and silence, 30 stories above a city she could no longer see. The staff had, as he'd promised, doubled. There were new guards. Not the brick monoliths in suits. These were men in tactical gear, armed with short-barreled rifles, who patrolled the perimeter of the living room. They did not look at her. They did not speak. They were part of the new, brutalist architecture. And her studio was locked. The heavy wooden doors, which had always opened for her, were now sealed. She had tried the handle on the first morning, her heart pounding a dull, sick rhythm. It was locked from the outside. He had taken her sanctuary, he had taken her work. She was a prisoner, locked out of her own gilded cage, left to roam the larger, darker prison of the living room. She didn't paint. She didn't sketch. She didn't eat. She sat on the sofa, wrapped in the cashmere blanket, and stared at the steel shutters. She was back to being a thing, an object, a liability he had stored in a box. The rage of her art, the fire of her frustration, all of it had been extinguished, drowned in the sterile, air-conditioned silence. She was nothing. On the 4th day, the elevator chimed. She didn't flinch. She was too numb. The doors opened, and he entered. It was not the Pakhan from the gallery. It was not the muse from her studio. It was a ghost. Mikhail looked ruined. He wore the same suit from 3 nights ago, but it was rumpled, as if he'd slept in it. His dark hair was matted. There was a cut over his right eye, stitched with black, angry thread. He was pale, a grayish, exhausted pallor under his skin. He was moving with a bone-deep weariness, his broad shoulders slumped. The war she had started was, she realized, a war he was losing, or one that was costing him pieces of his soul. He walked straight past her, not even acknowledging her presence. He was heading for the spiral staircase. He was heading for her studio. No. The word was a dry, cracked whisper. She hadn't even realized she'd spoken it. He stopped. His back was to her. No, she said again, and this time there was life in it. It was a spark of the old familiar rage. She stood up, the blanket pooling at her feet. You don't get to do that. He turned slowly. His pale gray eyes were hollowed out, dark with exhaustion and something she couldn't, or wouldn't, name. Do not, he warned, his voice a gravelly rasp. You don't, she said, walking toward him, her bare feet silent on the cold concrete. She was a wraith in a silk dress, facing down the devil. You don't get to lock me out. You don't get to take my work. You don't get to hide in my space. It is my space, he growled. It is my penthouse. You are my property. You will be silent. You will be safe. And you will stay out of my way. I was safer when you were sitting in that chair, she shot back, and the truth of it vibrated between them. I was safer when I was yelling at you. I was safer when I was painting you. She was close now, standing at the foot of the spiral staircase, blocking his path. She had to crane her neck to look up at him. You've locked me out. You've boarded up the windows. You've turned this place, me, into a tomb. And for what? So you can go in there and what? Stare at the portrait? Stare at the noise? You think you can lock it in there with you? He stared down at her, and she saw the mask crack. She saw the profound, abyssal exhaustion behind it, the noise in his head. Her scream. It was winning. It's poisoned, he whispered, the words raw. Sidorov, Orlov, they saw the work. They saw it. It's tainted. I cannot sit in that room. I cannot look at the art. It is, all I see is you, in the gallery. All I hear is your voice. My scream, she finished for him. His eyes closed. Da. So you lock me out and you lock yourself in, she said, her voice shaking with a new, terrible understanding. That's your solution. You've put us in separate cages. You can't stand it, can you? You can't stand me, and you can't stand to be without me. You are a coward. His hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around her throat. It wasn't a choke. It was a grip. He didn't squeeze. He just held her, his thumb pressing against the frantic pulse at the base of her jaw. He had lifted her just slightly, so her feet were barely touching the floor. Do not call me that, he breathed, his face inches from hers. The Pakhan was back, his eyes glacial, the smell of whiskey and old adrenaline rolling off him. She did not struggle. She did not fight. She held his gaze, her hands at her sides. She could feel the raw, split skin of his knuckles against her neck. Then, what? Are you? She choked out, her voice a strained rasp. You drag me into your darkness. You make me see you. And now you're hiding from me, from him, from Sidorov. His grip tightened, and black spots danced in her vision. I am handling Sidorov, he snarled. By throwing tables? She gasped. His eyes flared, and then as quickly as it had come, the rage died. It drained out of him, leaving the ghost. He let her go. Katya collapsed to her knees, coughing, dragging in painful, ragged breaths, her hands at her throat. Mikhail staggered back, staring at his own hand, the hand that painted, the hand that killed, the hand that had just hurt her. He looked at her, crumpled on the floor, and his face. It broke. This, he whispered, his voice cracking. This is what I do. I corrupt. I destroy. I touch, and I ruin. He backed away from her, up a step on the spiral staircase. He looked terrified, not of her, of himself. I offered you a gallery, he said, his voice hollow. I gave you an execution. I offered you a sanctuary, and I made it a cage. And now, I put my hands on you. Mikhail, she whispered, her throat raw. I cannot fix this, he said, the admission torn from him. I cannot be near you, and I cannot let you go. Sidorov will never stop. As long as you are alive, as long as he thinks, you matter to me. He will hunt you. So what? She spat, pulling herself up. You'll just keep me here? In the dark? Locked away? Until I go insane? Or until you do? No, he said. He looked at her, his eyes dead, the decision made. I am sending you away. Her heart stopped. What? I have a plane in Helsinki, a new identity, new papers, a new life, in Argentina, Australia, somewhere. He will never look, somewhere no one will ever look. You're letting me go? I am erasing you, he said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. You will be K. Petrova forever. You will be a ghost. You will have all the money you need. You will have all the supplies you will ever want. You will be free. But Katya Petrenko will cease to exist, and you will never, ever see me again. This was it. The offer, the escape, everything she should have wanted. Freedom, her art, a life. She looked at him, the broken, haunted, self-loathing man, offering to cut out his own heart to save her. He was offering to send her away, not for her safety, but for his. He couldn't live with her, and he couldn't live without her. He couldn't live with her scream in his head. He was cutting out his weakness. He was cutting out his muse. She saw her future, a quiet life in a sunny, beautiful place, painting, safe, and utterly, completely empty, an endless, sterile, silent life. A life without this, without the rage, the darkness, the noise, without him. No, she said. His head snapped up. He looked at her, stunned, as if she had just slapped him. What did you say? No, she said, and her voice was strong. It was the strongest it had ever been. She stood up, her legs steady. She walked to him, stopping just at the base of the stairs. I am not your weakness. I am not your secret. And I am not a ghost. I'm not going to run. You do not understand, he stammered, confused. He will kill you. Then he will kill me, she said, her voice a blade. I am not running. You don't get to break me and then throw me away because I am broken. You don't get to show me, and then tell me to go paint sunsets in Australia. Katya, this is my life, she shouted, and the force of it echoed in the steel-plated tomb. You took it. And then you gave me a new one, in that studio. You gave me, the artist, and the artist. She doesn't run. She pointed a shaking finger at the locked studio door. He wants to find your weakness? Fine, let him come. But I am not hiding. And neither are you. She walked past him, up the stairs. She stood in front of the locked studio door. You are a Pakhan, she said, her back to him. You are the man who took this city. And you are letting him, Sidorov, lock you out of your own home, lock you away from the only quiet you've ever known. She turned. He was still on the stairs, staring at her, his face a mask of profound, shattered disbelief. I am not your weakness, Mikhail, she said, her voice suddenly, terribly soft. I am your witness. Now, open this door. I have a portrait to finish. Chapter 10. Mikhail Volkov stared at her. She was a ghost, a wisp of a thing in a ruined silk dress, her throat angry and red from his own hand. She stood on the mezzanine landing framed by the locked door of her studio, and she was magnificent. She was terror and rage and a spine of pure, unbreakable steel. She had been offered freedom, safety, a new life, and she had, in the face of his own broken, monstrous confession, thrown it back in his face, not for him, for herself, for the artist. "I am not your weakness, Mikhail. I am your witness." The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had spent his entire adult life building a fortress of silence, of terror, of control. He had collected beautiful, dead things because they were quiet. Then he had collected her, a living, breathing, screaming, chaotic thing. He thought he was caging her, but he had, in fact, uncaged himself. And when the world had finally seen the man behind his bars, the man she had exposed on canvas, his first instinct had been to hide, to kill the evidence, to send the witness away. And she had said no. She had called him a coward, and she was right. "He will hunt you," he said again, his voice a low, hollow rasp. He was still on the stairs, trapped between his fear and her challenge. He will not stop. What Sidorov saw in that gallery, it was not just a painting of his rival. He saw leverage. He saw a soul. "He knows I have one now, because of you. Because of that canvas." "Good," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. "Let him know. Let him see. And let him come." She was insane, or she was the sanest person he had ever met. "You don't know what you're asking for," he whispered. "The war, it has already begun. The men I sent, Orlov's people. Sidorov was prepared. It was a test, a probe, to see how I would react, and I reacted, violently. I showed him your value. And now you will show him your strength," she said. She held out her hand, not to him, to the door. "Or are you going to let him keep you from this? From the quiet? Are you going to let his noise win?" He looked at his hand, the one that had gripped her throat. The knuckles were split, the blood dried black. He had used this hand to hurt her, to silence her. He had become the very thing he was trying to fight, a creature of pure, destructive noise. Your noise is better. She wasn't just offering him sanctuary. She was offering him an armor, a weapon. He looked at her, his witness. This slip of a girl who had seen the crushed bone beneath his scar, who had seen the coward beneath the Pakhan. And she was not afraid. She was angry. She was ready. Slowly, his legs heavy, he climbed the remaining stairs. He stood in front of her. She did not flinch. She did not back away. She held his gaze, her chin high, her throat a map of his violence. He reached into his pocket. His hand closed around a small, cold metal key. The one he had used to lock the door, to lock her out and him in. He slid the key into the lock. The snick of the tumblers turning was deafening in the steel-plated silence. He pushed the door open. The studio was cold. The air was stale. With the steel shutters down on the main windows, the only light was the track lighting, which he had left off. The room was a cave of shadows. The paintings, returned from the gallery, were stacked against the far wall, each one shrouded in a white muslin cloth. They looked like bodies in a morgue. The portrait of him, the one that had started this, was among them, its power hidden. The charcoal sketch, however, still hung on its wall, a silent, brutal accusation. Katya walked past him, into the center of the room. She was home. She touched nothing. She just stood, breathing in the familiar, faint scent of linseed oil and turpentine, a scent that was now mingled with the faint, coppery tang of his blood. "This is not a bunker, Mikhail," she said, her voice quiet. "This is not a tomb. It's a studio, and a studio is a workshop." She turned to face him. He was still in the doorway, a shadow in the darkness, a monster afraid to enter his own sanctuary. "I am going to paint," she said. It was a declaration. "And you?" "Are going to sit. Sidorov can wait. The war can wait. You cannot. You are coming apart. You are bleeding noise. You need the quiet." He said nothing. He just watched her. "Take off your jacket," she commanded. He blinked. "Katya!" "You heard me. Take it off. And the shirt." His eyes narrowed. This is not a game," she snapped, and the artist was back, the fiery, frustrated tyrant of the canvas. "I am not your toy. I am your artist, and you are my subject. You are cut. You are bruised. You are at war. And I am going to paint that. I am not painting the man in the chair anymore. I am painting the man who threw the table, the man with the cut over his eye. Now sit." She pointed to the stool, the one he had sat on when she'd first sketched him. He was stunned. She was not afraid of him. He had hurt her, and she was not afraid. She was working. She was processing his violence, his fear, her fear in the only way she knew how. She was going to put it on a canvas. She was going to take ownership of it. Slowly, as if in a trance, he shrugged off his rumpled suit jacket. It fell to the floor. He undid his cuffs, his fingers clumsy, and pulled the bloody, stained shirt over his head. The bruise on his ribs was a dark, horrific, swirling galaxy of purple and black. The cut over his eye was stark, the stitches ugly. He was a landscape of violence. He walked to the stool, he sat. He was bare-chested, exposed, his scars. The old one on his face, a dozen others she'd never seen, latticed across his shoulders and chest, all visible under the harsh, artificial light. He was no longer the Pakhan. He was not the collector. He was just the man. Her subject. Katya's breath was ragged. She turned and unveiled a new canvas, the 7-by-9-foot monolith she had once been too intimidated to touch. She dragged it to the center of the room, positioned the easel, and turned on the bright, focused painting lights. She looked at him. At this magnificent, broken, terrifying man who had just surrendered his own war to sit in her studio. She grabbed her charcoal. She would map him, not just his face, all of him. You offered to send me away," she said, her voice soft, the scrape of the charcoal the only sound. To erase me, to keep me safe." "Duh," he rumbled. He was watching her, his eyes hollow. "You were not sending me away for my safety, Mikhail," she said, her arm moving, laying in the broad shadow of his bruised ribs. "You were sending me away for yours." He said nothing. He just watched her hand move. "You are not afraid Sidorov will kill me," she continued, her voice a low, intense, creative hum. She was seeing it now. The lines, the form. "You are afraid he will use me. You are afraid that you care." The muscle in his jaw jumped. He looked away at the charcoal sketch of himself on the wall. "Look at me," she commanded, her voice a blade. His eyes snapped back to hers. "You do," she whispered. "You care. And it's the loudest noise of all, isn't it?" He did not speak. He did not have to. His eyes, the raw, haunted, exhausted gray, said everything. He had built a fortress to keep the world out, but he had, by accident, locked her in. And in doing so, he had trapped himself. "Good," she said, a fierce, almost terrifying smile touching her lips. Then we will use it. She stepped back, looking at the initial frantic sketch. It was him. It was the war. I am not your weakness, she said, grabbing her palette, her hands no longer shaking. I am not your secret. And I am not a ghost. She began to mix her paint. The custom-milled Mars Black, the Viridian, the Alizarin. I am your artist, and you are my Pakhan, she said, and the word felt different. It was not a title of fear. It was a claim. And we are going to paint our way out of this. He watched her, this small, furious woman who had just claimed him, who had refused freedom in favor of his darkness, and as she began to paint, as her noise, the scrape of the knife, the whisper of the brush, her muttered, intense curses, began to fill the room, he felt the chaos in his head, her scream, the blood, the calculations. Begin to quiet. He was not in a tomb. He was in a workshop, and the work had begun. Chapter 11. The world shrank to the dimensions of the 7 by 9 foot canvas. The steel-plated penthouse, once a tomb, became a forge. The steel shutters remained down, locking out the city, the light, the world. But inside, the studio was a blaze of electric light. The silence was gone, replaced by the intense, focused hum of work. Katya painted like a woman possessed, and Mikhail sat. But the new arrangement was nothing like the old. He was no longer a passive, silent subject. He was the Pakhan at rest, a wounded king holding court from his battered stool. He sat for her, bare-chested, the stitches over his eye pulling tight. The horrific, galaxy-sized bruise on his ribs slowly shifting from black to a sickening, mottled purple and yellow. He let her document every injury, every scar, every line of weariness and control. And while she painted, he worked. On the second day of the new portrait, his sovetnik, the man with the pitted face, had entered the studio. Katya's brush had frozen, her entire body tensing. "Get him out," she'd snarled. "He stays," Mikhail had rumbled from the stool. "He's noise, Mikhail." "I can't." "He is my hand," Mikhail said, his voice flat. "You wanted the Pakhan. You wanted the man at war. This is the war. You will paint and I will work, or this is all a lie." So the sovetnik stayed. He stood in the corner, by the framed charcoal sketch, a silent gray man holding a tablet. And Mikhail, while holding his pose for Katya, began to give orders. It was the most surreal, terrifying, and profoundly intimate experience of her life. She was painting the texture of the scar on his jaw, her smallest sable brush loaded with a mix of titanium white and raw sienna, trying to capture the precise way the damaged skin pulled, and he was, in that low, gravelly Russian, dismantling a man's life. "Liquidate the holdings. All of them," he'd said, his pale eyes fixed on her face. "I don't care about the loss. Burn the building. Da. With him in it." Katya's hand had slipped. A line of white, intended as a highlight, slashed across the dark shadow of his cheek. "Damn it," she hissed, wiping it with a solvent-soaked rag. Mikhail's head tilted. "You are angry." You just ordered a man killed," she whispered, her hands shaking. "And you're watching me paint." "I am," he said, as if stating the obvious. "How? How can you be in these two worlds at once?" He looked past her, at the massive, chaotic, 7 by 9 foot canvas. It was no longer just a portrait. It was a battlefield. It was all violent, slashing strokes, dark, angry shadows, and the solitary, brutal, bruised figure of the man at its center. Before, he said, his voice a low rumble. The noise. It was a storm. In my head. The moves, the violence, the past, Sidorov, it was all screaming. He pointed his chin at her palate. I watch you, choose, the alizarin, the umber, you are frustrated, you curse, you scrape the paint away, you fight. His gaze met hers, and the intensity in his eyes was a physical weight. Your process, he said, tasting the word. Your noise. It is singular. It is focused. It is clean. It is not chaos. It is creation. It focuses the storm in my head. It gives it a shape, a purpose. He looked at his Sovetnik. Pavel, wait outside. The Sovetnik nodded, bowed his head and left, the heavy door clicking shut, plunging them back into their silence. Mikhail turned his full, undivided attention back to her. The Pakhan was gone. It was the man. Sidorov, he said, his voice changing, becoming heavier, older. You asked how. You wish to know. Mikhail, you don't. He is not just a rival, he interrupted, his voice dropping to a whisper. He is the beginning of the noise. He looked at the scar on his own face, reflected in her eyes. This, he said, touching the white line. This was not Sidorov. This was a gift from my father. Katya stopped breathing. My father, Mikhail continued, his voice a dead, flat monotone, was like your father. A gambler, a weak man, but he did not gamble with money. He gambled with power, and he lost to Sidorov. He was back there, she could see it. His gray eyes were no longer in the studio. They were in a dark room, decades ago. I was 10, he whispered. Sidorov and his men, they came to our apartment. My father, he begged, he wept, he offered, my mother, he offered me. Katya made a small, choked sound. Sidorov. He laughed. He said my father's debt was too large to be paid in flesh. He said it must be paid in sight. To teach him to watch his markers, and he had his men hold my father down. Mikhail's hands, resting on his knees, clenched into white-knuckled fists. I watched, he breathed. He made me watch. As he took my father's eyes with a cigar cutter. Katya's vision swam. She felt her knees buckle and she gripped the easel to stay upright. That is the noise, Katya, he said, his voice breaking. That is the sound, the smell. It has been in my head for 20 years. It is Sidorov. He looked at her, and his face was a raw, open wound. I did not take this city. I hunted it. I hunted him. I dismantled his empire piece by piece until I could take his crown, until I could be the Pakhan. And he ran, and he hid. Until the gallery, she whispered, understanding, until he saw me. He did not see you, Mikhail said, his voice lethal. He saw leverage. He saw a new pair of eyes, my eyes, the one thing, the only thing I could not bear to lose, the only thing that makes the noise stop. He had confessed. He had given her the key to his entire dark, brutal world. He had shown her the source. Mikhail. She wept, her voice thick, the brush hanging, forgotten in her hand. He looked at her, his face wrecked. The confession had cost him. He looked. Empty. I offered you Argentina, he rasped. A new life. I begged you to go. You should have gone. It was an appeal, a final desperate plea. He was giving her one last chance to be afraid, to run from the monster he had just shown her. She looked at him, this giant, broken, terrifying man. This boy of 10, forced to watch the unimaginable, the man who had sat in her studio, quietly, just to find a moment of peace. She set her palette down, she set her brush down, she walked toward him. He tensed as she approached, his body bracing as if expecting a blow. She was a small, paint-stained creature, walking into the lion's den. She did not stop until she was standing between his knees, her face level with his bruised, scarred chest. He was so large. He radiated a palpable heat. She looked up at his face, at the agony in his eyes. "You should have gone, Katya," he whispered, his voice a prayer. "No," she said, her voice clear and strong. She reached up, slowly, not with fear, with purpose, with the absolute focused intent of her art. Her fingers, stained with alizarin crimson and Mars black, were steady. He flinched as her hand knee-teared his face, his eyes squeezing shut, bracing for a touch that would bring pain. Her paint-stained thumb, surprisingly gentle, touched the stitches over his eye. A small fleck of crimson paint, the color of blood, was left on his skin. "You're bleeding," she whispered. His eyes snapped open. He stared at her, confused. She showed him her thumb smeared with the red-black pigment. "You're still at war. You're not finished." She put her other hand on his shoulder, her palm flat against his skin, feeling the steady, heavy beat of his heart. She was claiming him. "I am not." "Your eyes, Mikhail," she said, her voice a low, fierce vow. "I am not your weakness, and I am not running." She leaned in, her forehead almost touching his, her gaze locked with his. "I am your artist," she claimed, "and you are my Pakhan. And Sidorov, he does not get to take anything from this room, he does not get to have your sight, and he does not get to have my scream." She stepped back, her hand falling from his face, leaving the streak of red paint like a battle mark. "Now hold still," she ordered, picking up her brush. "We're not finished." Chapter 12. The portrait was a mirror, a 7-by-9-foot confession. It was finished. Katya stood back, her entire body aching with a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. She had been painting for, she didn't know, days. The studio was a wasteland of spent paint tubes, oil-soaked rags, and the lingering, sharp scent of turpentine. Sidorov, the war, the steel-plated world outside, all of it had dissolved, leaving only this. Her and him. Mikhail was still on the stool, a living sculpture of bruised flesh and iron will. He was no longer just her subject. He was her creation. She had rendered every scar, every line of pain, every shadow of the darkness he'd confessed. She had painted the 10-year-old boy, and the Pakhan, the monster and the muse. And in the eyes, in the pale, storm-gray eyes, she had, with a final, terrifying stroke of her smallest brush, captured the quiet he craved. "It is done," she whispered. Her voice was a dry, cracked rasp. Mikhail looked at the canvas. He had been watching her work, not himself. Now he truly saw what she had made. He saw the man from the gallery, the man from the bloody fight. He saw the man who had thrown the table, and he saw the man who had, for 20 years, been haunted by the sound of his father's screams. He saw all of it, all of him, captured in oil and pigment. "It is," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "It is the truth." "It is us," she corrected. He stood slowly from the stool. He was a war-torn colossus, his bare, scarred chest rising and falling. He walked toward the canvas, his feet silent on the concrete, He reached out, his hand, the one that had gripped her throat, hovering just over the surface. He traced the line of his own painted scar, his fingers shaking almost imperceptibly. You saw, he breathed. All of it. And you. You did not run. I told you, she said, standing her ground, though her heart was hammering. I am your witness. He turned to her. The raw, haunted look in his eyes was gone. It was replaced by something new. Something absolute. A decision. A claiming. He was about to speak. He was about to... A sound, so loud and alien it felt like a physical blow, ripped through the studio. It was not a phone. It was an alarm. A harsh, electronic, repetitive screech. Simultaneously, the track lights in the studio died, plunging them into darkness. A second later, red emergency lights bathed the room in a pulsing, hellish glow. Mikhail! The Sovetnik, Pavel, burst through the studio door, a gun in his hand. He's in the building! Sidorov, he used the service shaft. My men they're down! He's coming to the elevator! The Pakhan was back. In an instant, the muse was gone, replaced by a creature of pure, lethal focus. He didn't ask how. He didn't rage. He moved. He crossed the room in 2 strides, not to his gun, but to her. He grabbed her arm. There is a panic room, he snarled, dragging her. Behind the supply wall, you will go in. You will not make a sound. No, she screamed, yanking her arm from his grip. Mikhail, no, I am not hiding. This is not a painting, Katya. This is him. I know. I am not your weakness. I am not... Ding! The sound was soft, polite. The sound of the private elevator arriving. MKE Pavel and Katya. They all froze. The studio door was open, leading to the main mezzanine. They could see the elevator doors. Mikhail shoved Katya behind his bare back, his body a shield. Pavel raised his weapon, his hands steady. The elevator doors slid open. The man who stood there was not a brute. He was older, in his late 50s, with a shock of silver hair and a bespoke dark red smoking jacket. He looked like a university professor. He was holding a small silver-plated pistol, and he was smiling. Mikhail moy malchik? Sidorov purred, his voice like silk sliding over gravel. My little boy. All this steel, all these guards, all this drama, and in the end, you still couldn't protect the things you care about. Mikhail was radiating a violence so profound it was almost visible, but he was still. He was watching, calculating. You should have killed me, old man, Mikhail growled. Ah, but that is never my way, Sidorov said, stepping into the penthouse. He glanced at Pavel. Pavel, you can put the gun down. You are, after all, on my payroll. Katya's blood turned to ice. Pavel, the Sovetnik, the gray man, the shadow, did not move. Sidorov tsked. No? Loyalty. How disappointing. I suppose I'll have to deal with you myself. In a blur, Sidorov raised his pistol and fired, not at Mikhail, at Pavel. The shot was deafening. Pavel collapsed, a dark, blossoming stain on his chest. Pavel! Mikhail roared, lunging. Ah! Sidorov chirped, leveling the gun at Katya. Mikhail froze, his body halfway across the mezzanine, his hand outstretched. He was trapped. There, Sidorov smiled, his eyes glittering with sadistic pleasure. That's the look. That's the noise. The same paralytic terror. The same helplessness. You look just like your father, on his knees. Sidorov walked slowly, casually, into the studio. He saw Katya, hiding behind the easel. He saw the massive 7 by 9 foot portrait. He let out a low whistle. My, he breathed, looking at the painting. She is good. She saw you. She saw the little terrified boy. And she painted him for the world to see. He turned his smile on Katya. An incredible talent, truly. A shame I must end it. You see, Mikhail, he made a terrible mistake. He let you live. I only took his father's eyes. I left the boy. A foolish, sentimental error. A loose end. But I learn. He raised the gun, aiming it directly at Katya's head. I will not make that mistake again. I won't just take your eyes, Mikhail. I will take your sight. I will take your witness. Mikhail was trembling. He was 10 years old, watching, helpless. The noise. The sound. His father. Katya. It was all screaming. He was paralyzed. Mikhail? Katya's voice cut through the red haze. It was not a scream. It was a command, sharp, focused, her noise. He looked at her. She was not crying. She was not begging. Her face was a mask of pure artistic rage. She was furious. Paint, Mikhail? She ordered. It broke the spell. Katya did not wait. She grabbed the first thing she could reach, the heavy 2-liter metal can of turpentine. With a guttural scream of her own, she threw it. It was a terrible, desperate, clumsy throw. But it was true. The can smashed into Sidorov's shoulder. He cried out, startled, the gun firing wildly, the bullet pinging off the steel shutters. The solvent splashed across his face, his eyes. He screamed, a real high-pitched scream of agony. My eyes! Mikhail Volkov was no longer 10 years old. He crossed the studio in a single, bound, a predator unleashed. He didn't go for the gun. He went for the man. He hit Sidorov in the throat, the same open palm strike that had crushed Orlov's man. But this was not a warning. This was an execution. Sidorov collapsed, gagging, his pistol skittering across the concrete. Mikhail was on him. He grabbed the front of Sidorov's jacket, hauling him to his knees. The man was blind, choking, terrified. It's loud. Sidorov gurgled, clawing at his burning face. Mikhail looked at the man who had authored his entire life of pain. He looked at the monster who had filled his head with noise. He felt nothing. Just quiet. He looked over his shoulder. Katya was watching. Her face was pale, streaked with paint, but her eyes were steady. She was his witness. Mikhail picked up Sidorov's fallen pistol. He pressed the barrel to the man's forehead. This, Mikhail Volkov whispered, his voice a dead, flat calm, is for the quiet. He pulled the trigger. The sound was final. The noise, after 20 long years, finally stopped. The red emergency lights switched off. The main penthouse lights flickered, then hummed back to life, flooding the studio in clean white light. The body of Sidorov, a stain on her concrete floor. The body of Pavel, a silent guardian. Katya was breathing heavily, her hands clenched. Mikhail stood. He was covered in blood. His, Sidorov's, he was the man from her painting, brought to life. He was the Pakhan who had just ended his war. He walked to her. He did not stop until he was standing in front of her, his massive, bloodied frame blocking out the light. She had to tilt her head all the way back to see his face. You stayed, he breathed, his voice raw with a terrible, profound awe. I told you, she whispered, her voice shaking, but her gaze was unwavering. I am your witness. He looked at her, this small, furious, unbreakable woman. his artist, his sight. He reached up, not with the hand that held the gun, but with his other. His scarred, calloused hand. He cupped her jaw, his thumb brushing the streak of Mars black on her cheekbone. "Tai moja dusha," he whispered. "You are my soul." And he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a claiming. It was a brand. It was the raw, desperate, brutal taste of a man who had just clawed his way out of hell and found his salvation. It was the taste of blood and turpentine and the end of the world. She didn't flinch. She kissed him back, her paint-stained fingers gripping his arms, claiming him as he had claimed her. The elevator dinged again. His remaining guards, having fought their way up, burst onto the mezzanine, guns raised, only to freeze at the sight. The Pakhan, bare-chested and bloodied, was kissing the artist in a room that held 2 bodies and 1 masterpiece. Mikhail broke the kiss, resting his forehead against hers. He did not look at his men. He did not look at the bodies. He only looked at her. "Clean this up," he ordered, his voice a low growl. "All of it." What now?" Katya whispered, her breath mingling with his. Mikhail looked around the studio, at the painting, at her. The steel shutters were still down, sealing them in. "Now," he said, "the war is over. The work begins." He took her hand, his bloody, calloused fingers lacing with her small, paint-stained ones. He turned to his men. "Raise the shutters." There was a heavy, grinding thunk as the locks disengaged. With a low, mechanical hum, the massive steel walls began to rise. And the light poured in. It wasn't the harsh, gray light of the storm. It was the sun. A real, brilliant, unfiltered dawn, turning the rain-swept city into a river of gold. It flooded the studio, illuminating the dust motes, the body of Sidorov, and the massive 7-by-9-foot portrait. The painting glowed, the bruise of alizarin and viridian, the fury of the Mars black, the defiant hope of the titanium white. Mikhail stood with her, their joined hands at their side, and they watched the sun rise over their city. He was a monster claimed. She was a prisoner, free. "It needs more light," Katya whispered, looking at the portrait. "The left eye. The shadow it's still too dark." Mikhail looked at her, and the ghost of a smile, the real one, the one she had earned, touched his lips. "Then paint, moja dusha," he said. "Paint." Thank you so much for watching this story. I hope you felt every emotion. The tension, the heartbreak, and the quiet strength behind every choice. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It helps this channel grow and keeps these stories alive.